I'd like to welcome to your show and mine, Father Emma's Bottom Line, a fantastic author with a great new, extremely important book, Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care. It's about time that somebody went into this kind of depth on this subject. I'm honored to welcome the renowned author, two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee, Ms. Claudia Rowe. Claudia, welcome to Father Emma's Bottom Line.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. First of all, congratulations on such a fantastic book. Full disclosure, I have a lot of skin in the game as a 27-year police officer. I have, on the law enforcement side, but more experience, even the better understanding growing up in a household where I had foster brothers and sisters. So just wanted the folks to know that. Folks, if you wonder why, one of the reasons why prisons and shelters are so full, this story is part of the answer. I have so many questions for you, Claudia, but first of all, explain how you first became aware of how broken the foster care system is.
Okay, I've been a reporter for 34 years. All of that time, I've covered kind of where youth and government policy intersect. So that's public schools, juvenile justice, and child welfare, foster care. So I kind of knew this terrain for a long time. And in the early 2000s, there started to be research coming out about the outcomes of foster care, like what happens to former foster kids when they're young adults. So I knew that research in like 2008, and I remember being kind of aghast that more than half the kids who age out of the system when they're 18, the research said will be locked up by the time they're 26. It could also have happened while they were in foster care, like locked up in juvie, but 59% was like a crazy number. This is a system that's supposed to be doing better than if kids were left with their biological families. And here the research was saying more than half were going to end up, incarcerated for some time. Some, could be a very brief period of time, but they would have some kind of record. And 30% of kids who age out become almost immediately homeless. These are the outcomes. And that kind of blew my mind, but, I just sort of marveled at it and set it aside. I was kind of surprised that nobody was making a lot of noise about it, but it just was sort of in the back of my mind. And then many years later, in 2019, I was sitting in court, wasn't thinking about foster care. I was watching this teenage girl being sentenced for a murder she had committed while on the run from foster care. And watching that proceeding kind of brought it all home for me. She was a former foster kid. She had killed someone while she was in foster care, while on the run. And then I remembered this research from 10 years before. And it all kind of came together. Like, this is a big deal. Like, there seems to be this is a big number. So the first thing to do was figure out, is this girl some kind of extreme aberration, or was her path through foster care standard? Her act, of course, was extreme, but her path to that point was really typical of a lot of foster kids. And that, when I realized that, it kind of set me on the road to trying to figure out exactly how does this happen, and how come nobody is like making a lot of noise about this, because it wasn't, it's not a new spike, and it's not a recent trend. This has been the case for decades. We've had foster care for like a century, roughly 125 years, and it's not all that different from what it's always been. In doing the research for the book, I found out the first person legally executed in the then new state of Wyoming in 1892 was also a foster kid who was on the run and had committed a murder, right? So this is like an old thing that nobody talks about, and that is what sort of brought it all together for me.
There's just many times that your book just punched me dead in the face. I'm like on page 3, and I'm reading 400,000 kids are growing up with the state as their legal guardian. 400,000. And as you said, every year turning them out at 18, about 20,000 every year get turned out. They age out and they move, a lot of them straight into homelessness. Um, that's just a terrible way for anybody in life, but it's really even worse for a young person to start out their life like that. I mean, you mentioned, they don't have any money, they have very little education, and they're kicked outside. Um, there was just so many facts early on and throughout your book that I think would just knock people over the head because, like you said, it's been going on and nobody's talking about it until this book of yours. I just I saw it as a cop, but you think, okay, it's isolated incidents, even though you've seen it on and on. The magnitude of the numbers, factual numbers that you have, kudos to you for putting this all together.
Thanks. I, like you, was astounded nobody was making a thing of this, and that in itself, it's sort of like, it's either one of two things. It's either nobody knows, and if they knew, they would go crazy, or
Right.
people kind of do know in an unconscious way. Oh yeah, foster kids, nothing good's going to happen for them, and they just sort of shrug it off, like
Right.
resigned to it. I mean, it's one of these two things. Either you know and you've essentially accepted it, or you don't know, and hopefully you'll be upset when you learn. But
Right.
but the fact that clearly the system, I mean, people in the system, people who work in the system or who touch the system in some way, have always known this. They do know, and yet there seems to be, if you know, that means you're kind of accepting it because nobody was screaming about this. I shouldn't say nobody. Researchers were looking
Right.
at it, think tanks and foundations, but that
Right.
their work is very sequestered, and sort of for the general population, the regular person out there, the mom or the dad whose kid's in school, and you don't know that the child sitting next to yours doesn't really know where they're going home to that night. They might be going to their foster parent. They don't really know, because sometimes social workers pick kids up at school and they say, yeah, you're going somewhere else tonight. And that, of course, has huge effects on a kid's behavior. You're going to see a lot of acting out. You're going to see a lot of really hard to handle behavior. And I just kind of wanted to say, hey, see these kids, understand what's happening in their head and in their life. That's why I wanted to do it.
You know what? You said more than, hey, see these kids, with the things that you put out there. When you talked about, and everybody, want to educate your kids and give them a fair shot at life. And in your book, you talked about only 5% of these youth that age out at 18 get college degree. 5%.
It's actually less. I was being generous there. It's actually
okay. All right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was being, err on the side of, okay, it's a 4-year college degree. So there are, kids who attempt community college. A lot of kids don't see it all the way through. But for a 4-year, a bachelor's degree, yeah, fewer than 5%.
Wow. And, and to put some of these stats out there, another thing, traumatic start for people. You talked about that researchers have shown that youth in this situation suffer post-traumatic stress disorder nearly twice the rate of Iraqi war veterans. Yeah. Twice the rate. And I just want people to let that marinate. These are kids. These aren't even young adults. These are kids. And that's just an amazing number. And like you said in the book, once again, nearly half of them drop out of school, out of high school, by their mid-20s. They're living in poverty. You had another thing where you were talking about the MIT study that showed that foster kids are 3 times more likely to end up in prison by the time they're adults. In prison, 3 times more. And the last thing before I get to the question, in the Midwest, 59% of foster kids experience some form of incarceration by their mid-20s. And conservative numbers say that like 20, I think you had 25% of prison inmates are alumni of the foster care system. I put that all out there to people because I want to hammer people over the head with this fantastic book that is just so needed. Here's my question to you, and this is what you brought up, and it's a great, great question of your book, which is why you got involved with that first young lady who was up for murder. And your question was, does the public assume responsibility for a child when they do something that serious? Who's to blame if the child fails? Is it the child or is it the foster care system? I think that's a simple question, but huge.
Huge.
What's your thinking on that?
So I've gone round and round on this. It struck me when I started this book in 2019. I worked on it for, it came out this year. So 6 years from the start to the publication. So I worked this question around in my mind many times over that 6 years. So the foster care system is called in loco parentis, right? Like in place of a parent, right? The foster care system is supposed to essentially be the kid's parent. Okay, so then, if you turn that around, you go, hey, when a kid, any kid, a kid in a traditional home does something criminal, we don't hold their parents liable, though now we're starting to, for like you saw,
starting to see a change, right? Yeah,
right. Like with a school shooting, the Crumley parents, that kid's parents, also in the Midwest, I believe, they were charged, but that was very recent and very groundbreaking, because traditionally we don't hold parents legally accountable in general for crimes that their kids commit. So then that would be like the same as the foster care system in that sense, right? We don't hold the foster care system liable if a kid that's under their charge, under their authority, does something. However, what really struck me is, all right, so a kid is in foster care. Now the government, media, everybody, if a kid gets hurt while they're in foster care at their placement, like there's all kinds of headlines about, oh, the evil foster parent and what did they do and they hurt this kid and all that stuff, right? There's a million of those stories. But what really struck me is if the kid is a ward of the state, but they're not where they're supposed to be, they're missing from their placement, which is really, really common for adolescents, older kids in foster care, really common. Like they might run for an hour, a day, a week, but they're not where they're supposed to be at the given moment. And then they are immediately called on the run. They are labeled, it's a legal designation. And the legal designation essentially says when they are missing from care or on the run, the state is not liable for anything that happens to them out there, even though the state is supposed to be responsible for them. But when they're missing from placement, this teenager, she had been trafficked. She had been hurt. She was a ward of the state. She was the state's responsibility, but the state was not accountable for anything that happened to her, nor anything she did to someone else. So when she did kill a guy, the state wasn't liable for that either. So it was sort of like there's no way where the state has to really answer for them, except if they're, in their placement. But since it's so common that adolescents run from care, and there's sort of like nobody gets blamed except the kid, and the kid is whatever, 14 or 12 or 15, and they've had this usually pretty horrible childhood. They have like no stability. They're moved from place to place. So you have this kid in total turmoil, and like no one's responsible. This is the incredible thing. And foster parents said it to me too, furious. Like, is anyone responsible? No, just a teenage kid,
Right. It's just crazy. And like here in Connecticut, it's been a big deal over the last year when we were initially talking a little bit about parents starting to be held liable for certain things. There's been a lot of street takeovers by young kids, a lot here in Connecticut. And now I know the chiefs got together because it's always about public perception. And the police departments and the chiefs didn't like the look that it looked like, which was the truth, that cops weren't doing nothing about it. So now they have now gone after the parents. They're not just taking the cars. They are holding the parents. If the car is, which is usually in the parent's name anyway,
right,
they're holding the parents monetarily responsible, civil liability, with anything that happens, that their kid does while they're using their car. And yeah, that kind of stuff to me has to happen more, because if you don't have people, and I don't care whether it's parents or the state, if somebody never has any consequences, people are very apathetic. People are just very apathetic, and it's bad to say, but it's factual. Another thing, you're talking on page 4, and I just want to continue to people to understand the severity of this. When you spoke about half the teenagers in foster care, you were just talking about, they run away from their foster parents or their adoptive parents. And what that does, that leads to them being on the streets, being hungry, homeless, start to shoplift, trading sex for shelter, and being booked in juvenile detention, and then they're saddled. And once again, though I had the experience, I never thought about this until your book. Then they're saddled with the criminal records, and they're deemed unadoptable
right.
by people. Unadoptable. Please speak to that. Wow.
They're deemed unadoptable, and so then they go, okay, so they're deemed unadoptable because, first of all, any kid in foster care, pretty much after age 12, it's not going to happen. I mean, it does on rare occasions, but most people want to adopt a much younger child. If you haven't been adopted by roughly age 12, it's very unlikely that you will be. And so, first of all, if you've done any time in juvie at all, right, like any point, you probably have some kind of record. So when you finally get out of foster care, however that goes, when you're 18 or even 21, whatever, when you finally get out of foster care, it's going to be hard to get a job, to pass a background check for like an apartment, right? I mean, like these childhood glitches or problems.
They have any money for an apartment.
Right. You're not going to have any money because you have almost no education. So how are you going to really get a good enough job? How are you going to support yourself? If you're lucky enough to get a minimum wage job, it's not going to really be enough, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So then you're leading me to these 4 things. So in the research for the book, and I want to tell your listeners, the book is totally character driven. It is a story. It's not this like heavy policy. All the numbers and the laws and all that stuff is sort of woven in there, but this is really, 6 kids' story.
Right.
But in doing the reporting for it, I did find these sort of 4 major channels that kind of push kids toward lockup, and one of them is running away, as we just discussed, right? Kids run from their placement, not always because a foster parent is abusive or mean. Like this young woman who I opened the book with, her name's Marianne, that last foster parent, she loved that woman. That was her favorite placement. That was the best one. And yet, by that point, she was a chronic runner, just would run all the time. Mostly kids are running less from abusive homes and more toward something. They're looking for their biological families from whom they were removed, or who gave them up, or who were too addicted or mentally ill or whatever to parent them. They're looking often they're looking on the street for their parents who are on the street. Or they're looking for other kids who are like them, other kids on the street, other kids in the system, other kids who kind of get them, who know them, like family. It is sort of a urge, kind of a messed up or twisted, but an urge to connect. It is still that impulse. It is looking for a place where you feel like you belong, because foster kids so often don't feel like they belong because they're going to be moved around. They don't really belong anywhere. So that's the running thing. Okay, so you run, you go to juvie, you're unadoptable. Then you are likely to end up in a group home. Right? You're unadoptable. You're likely to end up in a group home. Group homes are really violent. Kids assault one another, and they assault staff. And then the cops are called, like, right? Like the cops, like staff will call cops and they take a kid to juvie, right? There you go. You just got another way toward lockup. The third thing is broken adoptions. So people do adopt from foster care, but the system that I've seen never has confronted the very high rate of kids who are adopted, but then kicked back into foster care by the adoptive parents. The adoptive parents say, cannot deal with this kid. They bring too many behavior problems. They don't show love, right? There's all this kind of expectation. Oh, we adopted you. Of course, a lot of kids want to be adopted, but then when they get there, they have so little experience with kind of like a conventional, traditional family structure.
Right.
Like Marianne, she didn't want to sort of participate in family dinners or movie night or like normal family stuff.
Right.
It was foreign to her. She felt like weird, like, you don't love me. You don't even know me. How can you say you love me? Like, it just felt very forced and fake to her. And you can see through teenagers' eyes, it would. To her adoptive parents, they were like, but we just want to love you. We just want to help. For her, it didn't feel right? So, okay, but the thing of broken adoptions, it's a less direct route to what I'm talking about, to lockup, but there is a psychologist who testified in Marianne's sentencing who said that the experience of rejection, that experience that so many foster kids adopted from the system, that the rejection they feel when their adoptive families say, no, like, we wanted you. Oh, now we see you. We don't like you anymore. We don't want you. That experience of rejection is profound, and it has real outcomes in behavior.
It's brutal. Yep.
And the last thing is what you said, aging out at 18 without support. You're 18 years old. Maybe you're 21. If you've met certain qualifications, you're allowed to stay in foster care until 21 in most states. But you have to be in school or you have to be employed, and the state usually has to approve your placement. So a lot of kids are 18. They're like, I'm done. I don't want the state in my business anymore. So most of them age out at 18. They might have a high school diploma at best. They have like no family to support them, no job or work experience. Like, what do you think is going to happen? So this is what happens.
Two of the pillars of raising a child, the two words that are pillars, there's other ones, but love and support. And that's what these kids, they get none of that throughout their journey. Love and support. And that's why they will turn and they will be edgy and have attitude problems, because they haven't had love and support throughout. And it's so hard. I know as a cop dealing with them, I understood. They just didn't trust anybody because nobody was there for them. Nobody was caring that kind of way. And that's why I give you so much respect with Marianne's case, that it caught your ears, your attention, and you wanted to do something about it. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, that the foster care system services basically poor children almost exclusively.
Only, yeah. There's no middle-class kids in foster care.
Right. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with Will Smith, they didn't have any foster care. But the U.S. repeatedly has used the threat of child removal as a tool to control the whole thing with poor people. Many middle-class kids, and as a cop, you see them all the time. They grew up with the same kind of home addiction problems, abuse, drugs, neglect, all that kind of stuff. but they don't get into the foster care situation. And to hold that over families' heads, poor family heads, it's just a crappy thing to do. We're going to take your kids away, and we're seeing a lot of that in the country these days and over the years. We're going to take your kids away, and it just destroys not only kids, it destroys families, and you know that well.
Yeah. So that is the thing. If there is like a middle class or affluent kid in foster care, it's so rare. It really doesn't happen. But if it happens, it's a TV show or it's a 10-page spread in the New Yorker. It's such an unusual thing that it's like, whoa, look at this weird story. It's only poor kids. And as you know, the other elephant in the room is that children of color are disproportionately represented. And just for people to understand, disproportionately means compared to their rate in the overall population. So like Black kids, it's like 14% of the US youth population. The US population under 18 is like roughly 14% African-American kids, but they're like 23 to 28%, more than a quarter really of the kids in foster care. That's what overrepresentation means. I think a lot of people are confused. They think that it means majority. It's not majority. It means as compared to their rate in the overall population, there are a lot more of them in foster care. So like white kids would then be underrepresented in foster care, though they are a large number of foster care kids, like over 40%. In the US population, white kids are more than 40%. So that in that sense, they're underrepresented.
Also, page 59, you had an email from an inmate in June of 2020, Arthur Longworth. And before I have you get into him, he seems like the unofficial dean of foster care. Give me a minute to read the powerful statement that he gave to you that you put in your book. And I quote, "Maybe the most harmful yet almost incapable element of experience in the foster care system is the lack of anything to hold on to. You have no stability in anything. You move from placement to placement, school to school, and your caseworker spaces changes constantly. With each change, you're expected to tell your story over and over again until you get to the point where you just can't do it anymore. You can't bring yourself to step foot in another new classroom full of faces to explain to. So you don't go to school and you move to a new placement. You're just numb. As far as anybody knows, you're nobody from nowhere, and that's just fine with you. Would you be surprised to know that in foster care group homes almost never talk? Their kids never talk about where they're from, even with each other. Yet with normal kids, where they're from is probably the biggest part of their identity," close quote. That statement comes from somebody in the belly of the beast. Can you please talk to that? Because, man.
Yeah. So Arthur Longworth is Arthur Longworth does a lot of things in this book. He serves a lot of purposes in the book. And one of the most important things that he does is to show. So Art is now 60. When he wrote that to me, he was, I don't want to say too much of the Art Longworth story. I don't want to give away too many spoilers here, but Art got a life sentence. So Art was kicked out of the foster care system when he was 16 onto the streets in Seattle, and it was 1981. The point of Art, and he was robbing people. He was on the streets. This was how he's surviving. He eventually killed a young woman, and he got a life sentence. So Art, there are a lot of things that Art does in this book.
Yes, sir.
All right. The first thing that is that I wanted him, because he's older, he's the oldest former foster kid in the book. I wanted to show how long this has been a thing, right? Like Art was in the system in the late 70s and early 80s, and he went into prison. When he was in prison after, he did a lot of time in solitary. He had a lot of problems early on. But once he calmed down, because he's not going anywhere, life sentence. Once he finally calmed down, he started to realize and recognize he knew everyone around him in prison. He knew them all from group homes. They were all former foster kids, or They were the children of the people he knew in foster care. So he, because of a life sentence, was just seeing generations of former foster kids or the children of former foster kids coming through the prisons. So Art, the other thing that is so important about Art, what I wanted this book to do, the original idea for the book was to show the psychological experience of what it is to be in foster care through the kids' eyes. I really wanted to tell this story through the experience through their eyes. I wanted it as much as possible to be like first person from them. It's not possible. You have to put too much framing around it. It has to be the writer voice explaining how it's going to be here, right? But I really wanted to articulate that psychological experience of being that kid, nobody from nowhere. But young person is usually not able to articulate their emotional experience the way an older, more seasoned person is. And while Art, who had a 7th grade
especially as traumatized as they are as well.
Right. So Art had no formal education after 7th grade. 7th grade.
7th, wow.
But in prison for so many years, he started educating himself, and he was a massive reader. And so by the time I met Art, I reached out to him through prison email. He's in his mid-50s. By that point, he had become a pretty good writer. He's a really good writer, but in his head, he's still attached to the kid on the street, because when you go, as you know, probably, when you go into prison as a young person, there's a certain kind of like frozen thing, like the rest of the world goes on, but you're sort of there in this stasis, like not paralyzed, but a little bit like your development is partly frozen. And the biggest part of your life are what you remember, the memories that you have from before. They're huge in your mind because everything in prison is the same every day. So for Art, he was still able to sort of touch that experience of being a young person on the street, that disconnection, that rage, but he had the tools, like the writer ability of an older person to explain it. So this was really valuable to me for my goal of trying to tell it through the eyes of the kid. And the passage you just read is it exactly. I think he explains it like beautifully. So Art was first me reaching out to him as like a gut check. I didn't think he was going to be a character. I thought he was going to be a research source. I thought I needed to bounce off of him. Hey, does this sound right? Are you willing to kind of help me understand this? But the more I knew Art, and the more I realized what a good writer he is and how he could explain this thing that I needed. And also, he has a wild story. The story of his journey is a really amazing story. And then, so the more I sort of got to know him, the more I thought, oh, he needs to be a character in this book. He serves a really important role. So,
I had when I talked to this guy, he was like 30 or 31 now, and he had spent many years of his youthful years in prison. And you just made me think of him, because he said he had seen a movie recently, and he said he felt like the character that he saw in the movie, where he was just standing still, stiff, couldn't move, and the world was revolving around him. And he saw friends, family members, people in prison, people he knew from school a little bit. The world was spinning, and he was just like a statue just standing there. And I just thought about that reference when you were talking about that.
I've heard this from a lot of guys, not, before I was writing this book. I've heard it from other guys who went into prison really young. This feeling of like the world moves on, but you're just in the same place.
Your boy Arthur Longworth, he's 95, and he doesn't, like you said, he's in jail for murder. He doesn't believe that his sentence is wrong. But what bothers him is the idea that there's no consideration of a person's circumstances leading up to that moment. That's his big thing. And he felt that it was unfair for kids who grow up in foster care, that there's no even looking at or understanding what they went through that led them to mess up the way they did. And he had a quote which I wanted to say, because he was really big on the injustice of the state dodging any accountability. And I agree with him 100%. And I quote, he said, "I feel like I was sentenced by my crime partner." Folks, I got to say that again. I feel like I was sentenced by my crime partner. So maybe no one who wasn't raised by the state will ever understand, but for the state not to acknowledge its role, its connection to me, has never felt honest. Close quote. That is as brutally direct, honest, and truthful as can be. That was just a powerful statement on his. Yeah. To me, and I was on the other side of the. No, the state has to. They have some culpability in what these kids end up doing. I'm sorry.
One wrinkle there. Yes, to your point, just the thing about art that was so powerful is exactly what you're talking about. What he said right around the part that you're quoting, the crime partner thing is, he says in the book that he feels like foster care, these are his words, raised him to be an animal. It was all about survival, and to survive, no empathy. And, like this hard, you can't have empathy, you can't connect to anyone. It's all about survival. He says, the state raised me to be an animal, and that's what I was. That's what he means when he's talking about, I feel like I was sentenced by my crime partner. His idea that he conceived while in prison was that he had been formed by this system, foster care, and then punished by the same government that formed him. This is what enraged him and was just driving him crazy. That's his thing.
I can definitely understand that. Speak to page 78 and 79. Talk to the guy, Charles Loring Brace, a young minister from Yale University. Talk about him a little bit, please.
Okay. So you're going into the history. So the book goes through some kids' stories, and then I step back and sort of say, like, wait, how do we get here? Charles Loring Brace is considered to be essentially the father of foster care, the guy who conceived it. He is a well-off, Yale-educated minister from the Northeast, sort of like a proper, wealthy patrician family. And he lands in, sorry? He lands
I got you.
Yeah, he lands in New York City. It's like late 19th century. So it's like the 1860s, roughly, 50s or 60s. And he sees in New York City at the time, which is where I'm from, by the way. So New York City at the time was just like the way in some cities we see homeless people all over the streets. That's what New York City was in those days, but kids. It was tens of thousands of destitute children living on the street. These were the kids mostly of immigrants from Eastern Europe, Italy, Jewish kids, Italian kids. These are the kids of new immigrants who were super poor, and they don't have enough money to care for their kids. So their kids are living on the street, and they're sort of banding together in gangs. These are gangs, and they're robbing people, surviving just like gangs, right? They have their own little criminal enterprises. So Charles Loring Brace, this like do-gooder, says, hey, what if we like rounded up the kids? And meanwhile, like America's this growing country, and we have all these, farmers sort of like populating the West, and they need labor. So what if we take all these kids on the street in New York and we send them out to the West, and they can be out of the, big, bad, evil city, and they can they will be fed and housed, and they can help all these new farmers in the West. And this is essentially the beginning of foster care, kind of like scooping up kids who are seen to be, headed to a bad end, crime. They're super poor, and they have no education really, and will like hook them up with families that want them for whatever they might want them for. Like this thing about
Right.
childhood
Yep.
like left pretty vague, but that's roughly the idea. And it was seen as this brilliant idea, like this win-win for everyone. You're going to save the kids, you're going to help the families. It was seen as this fantastic success. But the book has some, this lasted from like the late 1850s to 1929. This went on for, many decades into the 20th century. And by the end of it, it was like, I think more than 150,000 children were transplanted to the West. And at the end, some of those people, like in modern day, like in the 1980s and 90s, were remembering their childhood on those trains. And they wrote about what the experience was like, because nobody was asking the kids. But now they're old people and it's 1980 or 90 or whatever, and they're remembering what it was to be one of those kids, and not so good. Anyway, that is the start of foster care.
I was thinking about you and your book last Sunday, and forgive me, I don't remember if it was 60 Minutes, because I record both 60 Minutes and CBS Sunday Morning. But one of them, and they had a segment, and they were talking to people who were now in their late 60s to 80s. And I'm Catholic. And how the Vatican was taking kids from Italy, poor kids, mothers who were by themselves and they couldn't take care of them right now. And they would bring their child, please, take care of my son or daughter for a year, 2 years. Let me get on my feet and blah, blah. And then, they would say you can get your child back and this and that. And these kids never went back home. Thousands of them never went back home. They were shipped to the United States. And they were talking, I think they talked to like 4 people who grew up over here in the United States, but they were from Italy. Had no clue about their families, their parents, and a few of them researched and all this kind of stuff. A few of them got lucky, and few of them actually had their mothers there, and they were talking during the interview, and the mothers were like, I had no clue. I had nothing. I had no money. I had nothing. I had no clue that I would not be able to get my child back. And this was done by the Vatican, and they were paying $450. They were getting paid $450 per kid, which today's world is almost $1,600. And they were using it as a money maker. And I'm like, okay, that's not quite foster care, but it ended up being foster care. And this was done by the Vatican as a money maker. It was amazing, because I had just basically finished your book, and that just stuck for me.
So the book is, and what you're describing, it's like this whole sort of series of unintended consequences, right? Like there's all this sort of allegedly good intentions.
Yeah.
Like nobody's in the book, at least, there's no villain, right? There's no like abuser parent, or it's not like that. It's like we inherited this system that as I was describing, is like 125 years old. We inherited the system. It was sort of well-intended, but the problem with foster care is, okay, we inherited this system. We didn't know a whole lot about trauma and brain development and child development, all that stuff. But in the last 20 years, since
we do now, damn it, yeah,
2005, we do know. The Supreme Court ruled you can't put somebody to death for a crime they committed when they were under 18, because their brains are just different. They're just literally physically not the same as the people we're sentencing, right? They're not adults, and we can't hold them to the same standard, right? So U.S. Supreme Court ruled that. Okay, that was in 2005. So in 20 years, we have all this research and data and law, changes to law saying, hey, youth brain development is a thing. Here are the things that affect it. Here's what happens when it goes wrong. Like, we know all this stuff now, and we have not retooled foster care to match what we know. We still have this old inherited system that was like well-intentioned, kind of. It was well-intentioned, I'll say, But the problem is we just haven't adapted it to match what we know about science. This is the problem. It's a holding system. It is not a healing system. And we know that the kids who come into it need a healing system. This is the problem with foster care.
And with all we've learned about it, it seems like the system is still using a horse and buggy for transportation.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And, page 91, you were talking about the pediatricians who got together and they said, and I quote, removing children from their parents could cause irreparable harm to their developing brains, as you were talking about, and potentially lifelong effects. Taking children away from their mothers and fathers was wreaking dramatic and long-term damage psychologically into the physical structure of the brain. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And these were close quotes, but these were pediatricians in 2018. So like you said, the whistles have been blown. I mean, people have been putting certain things, people who have studied it have been putting out there, but there's still the horse and buggy. Talk about Arthur Fleming. This cat, he was the secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Because of his decree, kids in the welfare system, they were. You talk about it, because that cat pissed me off.
Okay, so again, same kind of thing. So this is 1961. Under Arthur Fleming, the system that we had in the US that was doing foster care up to that point was mostly white kids. They might have been like these children of immigrants from Europe, like was not what it is today. But right around, so basically, foster care kind of evolves at the same time that the US welfare system is evolving, not child welfare, but like welfare for parents, for usually moms who need the help. So initially, that system was targeted to white women who were like widows, or their partners, husbands, spouses were off in war or had died in like World War I, World War II. These widows, it was called like widows' stipends, and they were raising children. And so the government said, oh, we will help you. But once states, primarily in the South, so each state was allowed to set up its own criteria for what would allow you to get this government help. And states in the South started passing laws that essentially cut out Black women from being able to access these government benefits. And it was usually about like, you can't have a boyfriend. It was all this stuff about sort of lifestyle stuff. Yep. Basically, we don't like your lifestyle. You can't get the government aid. Then this guy, Arthur Fleming, in 1961, again, I don't know the guy, so I have to attribute like reasonableness.
Consider yourself lucky you don't know him.
Sorry?
Consider yourself lucky you don't know him, but go ahead.
So I don't know this guy, but he's basically saying, hey, if we're saying that these women can't have government aid because we don't like how they're living, well, we definitely shouldn't allow their children, to stay with them. So we've now said, hey, you guys, you Black moms, you don't get welfare, especially if you're a domestic and you work as a maid. No, you don't get welfare. But if we're saying that you don't get it and you can't really feed your kids and we don't like how you're living, well, we would be wrong to leave those children with you. And that is when huge numbers of Black kids get taken into the system. It is when the system changes to increasingly have kids of color in the system.
Yeah, you mentioned how from 61 to 62, it went from 163,000 to 272,000. And those are small numbers compared to what's going on today. Right. That was back in the 60s, early 60s. Page 223, you quote a 50-year-old man, and he had a stat where he's with the Federal Children's Bureau, and he told you, and I quote, "It's an unsolvable problem, mathematically impossible. He felt no matter which direction child care welfare led, kids were going to be harmed," close quote. I can understand people in the system who try to do things and nothing, they can't get changes made and this and that, and they get apathetic. I just don't believe that you can just flagrantly, brutally turn your back on youth like that and just say there's nothing that can be done. I have a problem with that, but go ahead.
Excellent segue. So I want your listeners to know that there are things happening slowly now that kind of point toward a better way. So this thing about when that guy says there's nothing you can do, kids are going to be harmed either way, that is essentially where we are right now in this country, an argument or a debate about, okay, now we know that taking kids away from their biological families can cause really severe psychological harm, even if that family was not so great. Even if a kid's biological mom was neglecting them or did hurt them and they couldn't be safe there, still the act of removing the kid from the home and placing them with strangers is a trauma, even if the home itself was so-called dangerous. It's an important thing to understand, because the reason it's important to understand is because, okay, now we know this, and the system, all these people who care about kids are working in the system. So they're like, okay, let's not do that. Let's keep more kids at home with their families and try to give these families services. Let's try to give them more mental health, substance abuse, or job training, or housing stabilization funds, right? Let's try to do that. And it's happening at different levels, to different degrees, in different states. It's either keep the kids or remove them. It becomes this really keep the kids with their parents or bring them into foster care. It becomes this really polarized debate, and it's become really politicized. So it's like two warring sides. I don't think that this book is taking a side one way or another. It's just saying, hey, these outcomes are bad. Foster care is bad for kids, even under the best circumstances, even with a great foster parent. It's not because they're villains. It's because the structure of the system is bad for kids' development, moving around, instability. Okay, so what do we do? So the book does point toward a couple of things, and one of them is kinship care. And it is happening more and more, which is the practice of, if a kid can't be raised safely with their biological parent or parents, the state will remove them, and instead of placing them with a stranger, will say, can a relative take care of them? Can your aunt or your grandparent? That, of course, is
saving that. That's key. I know you believe in that. I was saving that. That's key. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Yeah. So kinship care has sort of always been a thing, like grandparents taking in their grandkids. But the change is that the government is now, only very recently, saying, okay, we'll give you government money, support, just like we gave foster parents. We give them money every month to take care of these children. Okay, well, why can't you do it to grandma? Because otherwise grandma is draining her retirement savings, caring for children that she never intended to be parenting when she was 80 years old, right? So now the government is saying, okay, we will keep kids with their relatives or even a family friend, someone they know. I wouldn't say it's perfect. It is better. It's shocking that it's like new. And the reason is the same thing you're talking about, these attitudes. So the traditional attitude, even up to very recently, has been, oh, if you're a child in a family struggling with substance abuse or mental health problems, probably all your relatives are a disaster too. I mean, that was kind of the government's position. Like, right. Your immediate family has problems. Well, we got to remove you from like that entire world, and we'll just plunk you down into this world of strangers, and like your past will be obliterated and it will disappear and it won't have any effect on your life. Like, that's not how people work, right? People have memories, they have emotions, and they have ties. but the system has traditionally kind of ignored that or pretended that that's not a thing. Like you could just obliterate a kid's past and it'll all be all good. It just doesn't work. So that is why kinship care is kind of new, because they've always operated with this other model of like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So, your relatives are probably as messed up as your family. So forget it. So no, that is changing, which is good.
And that also ties into what Longworth was talking about. They feel they have no kinship with anything. Right. That ties in. Let me tell you, tell the audience my experience growing up with the foster care. I had great parents, thank God, and I had 2 foster brothers and a foster sister. My sister, she came with us. She was 2.5, and she stayed with us throughout. I think she left probably like 22, 23. And the 2 brothers, they were blood brothers, and they came and lived with us at 3 and 5 years old. And loving household, they didn't lack for anything. Everything was cool. And I'm just saying that because they were my parents. It was just a great situation. And we all got along and blah, blah, blah. Well, like I said, they came when they were 3 and 5, the 2 brothers. When the older one, he was like 13, 12 or 13, and his brother was a couple years younger. He overheard my mother on the phone arguing with a lady from the state because, like also in your book, or which I was going to get to later, it's almost like they tell a lot of foster parents, do not get close with the kids because they're going to be moved. They're going to be taken away. Don't get too close to them. Well, we got close. We were a family. And he heard my mother arguing with the state lady. She called and said they were coming to pick the boys up the next day. Out of the blue, my mother lost her mind. She was a church lady. She was cussing up and down, calling this lady everything but a child of God. She didn't understand this and blah, blah, blah. He heard this, and I went downstairs to get some. He ran out the door, and he ran away.
Yeah.
He was gone maybe 3 hours, and I remember it because it was raining. It was pouring, and he called the house, and he was at a Friendly's miles away, and my mother had me go pick him up, and they left the next day. It was just brutal. It was a terrible situation.
Your mom couldn't reverse it?
And because here's what happened. The mother, when she gave them up, she never gave up her full rights. Right. It was under the guise that if she ever got clean, right, she could get her boys back. She had a heroin problem, and she got clean, supposedly. She had no tracks, and she was fighting, and she wanted her kids back. They had to give them back no matter what. They were in a tough section of Bridgeport, one of the toughest sections of Bridgeport, off Stratford Avenue, with their mother. They stayed there a little bit less than a month. When they found out, she was shooting up. She was shooting up between her toes. So there was no tracks on the arms and all that stuff, and the behavior came back. So they took the boys away. And like you said in your book, that hit me, because when they take the kids away, they don't go back.
So then where did those 2 boys
we wanted them to come back. And the state would not allow them to come back to a loving home that they wanted to come back to. And to double down on their dumbness, they not only took them away from the mother, but they split them up. They split them up and sent them to 2 different places. And that was that. It was just brutal.
Do you know what happened to them? Like when they grew up, what happened?
You know, my godfather was a reverend at the time, and it was like 2 years later. He was somewhere in Connecticut. It was Christmas, and he saw the older one on TV singing with some other kids. He didn't know whether it was a church thing or whatever. And I wasn't home, but my parents saw it, and that was the last time they saw him. It was just on TV. Never found out where he was. After your book, and it was just a week ago, I've always searched for them, and no luck. But after reading your book, I found one of them, and what it was, his last name, I was spelling a little bit. I had 2 letters off, and when he was with us, he didn't like his first name, so my mother gave him another first name, and I had been looking under that name because he liked it so much. Well, he went back to his birth name, and I had been spelling it wrong, and I found him by accident. And there was one picture of him and his younger brother on his Facebook page. And somebody with the same last name, a female, on Facebook said, "Is that your brother's? Is that his brother so-and-so?" And a woman with the same last name, I think it might have been his wife, said, "Yeah, that's his brother so-and-so." So I'm trying to work on doing some more research to get in touch with the older one. But yeah, they had one picture. So they haven't been around each other because it was that one picture, but they're adults. They look like they were in their early 50s, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So wow. So you still have a story that's like unfolding. You're gonna
yeah.
I'm sure you will reach out.
Yeah. I hope I can find them.
The sibling thing is really serious. The thing about separating siblings, again, I did not understand this before I was doing the book. The impact on foster kids to be separated from their sibs is really severe, and all of them talk about it. Even when they're adults, like they all talk about the sibling thing in a way that I think those of us who have not been in foster care wouldn't grasp the essential need of the siblings. Somebody who knows where you come from, somebody who really gets you.
Who's been through everything you've been through.
Yeah.
That's all they had was each other. So through the bad situation before they came to us, through the great situation, through the bad situation when they were taken away, and then they were split up. Now, on the positive tip, Claudia, I know you're a big fan. Speak to Judge Ernestine Gray. She used a different approach to foster care, and really, she made some positive movement with it. Talk to that, please.
I'll keep it clean. She is a warrior. She's a warrior. I'm gonna say what I really want to say. She's a badass.
There you go.
Okay, so Judge Gray, who is now retired, she's no longer on the bench. So Judge Gray was in juvenile court in New Orleans, and that was her whole career. She had only worked there. And pretty early, like in the 80s and 90s, she was recognizing, hey, every kid in front of me is Black. Like there's white kids in New Orleans whose families are like not picking them up from daycare and are really, really poor and don't have enough to eat. How come only in juvenile court for removal from families and into foster care, how come it's only Black kids? That was the first thing. She was like, wait, what is the deal here? I know that there are white kids in struggling families, but they're not being, there's no petition for their removal. Basically what Judge Gray did it seems so simple, but it was kind of revolutionary. She made the state, the caseworkers, literally adhere to the letter of the law. And the letter of the law, the actual law, said the state has to prove why these children would be unsafe at home. You can't just operate on a feeling. You can't just operate on past history with the family, other children in foster care, or the family's past drug problems, or whatever it might be. You can't do that. You have to prove why this kid right now is going to be unsafe. And when she held the state to the letter of the law, the proof wasn't there. And so what Judge Gray essentially did was stop the flow of kids into foster care. And in New Orleans, and I mean, she brought it down, literally, this is incredible. She brought it down to double digits. There were like less than 30 kids in long-term foster care in New Orleans at one point. 30 kids. I mean, it was like double digits in a city of, you know, a sizable major metro area. She essentially ended long-term foster care. It was really controversial. And one of the things she did was essentially kinship care. She then a lot of times would say, okay, let's just put this kid with their relative. It won't be an official state placement. We're just saying, no, state, you didn't prove your case, but I am going to say, hey, relative, can you take this kid? Now, in her favor, what she always, so this was very controversial, and all kinds of people who care about kids in New Orleans were saying, you're putting children at risk. You're leaving them in unsafe homes, or you're putting them with relatives, and we don't know what's going on because their cases are closed. It is true that's true. That happened. Her proof for why this worked and why it was successful is that almost no children came back into foster care. There were no more CPS, there were like no more CPS complaints. Kids weren't getting, you know, killed when they were, or, you know, mortally wounded when they remained with their families or went to a relative's home. So that is sort of what she was using as proof, like kind of like using a negative as proof. Like, well, we don't see any problem, so I guess it's good. Now, people who criticized her, which there were many, said, hey, you know as well as I do, not everything is visible. And if you send a kid home with their relative, okay, maybe they don't show up in front of your court again, but it doesn't mean everything's good. But the numbers showed that kids like who were being killed or mortally injured were actually less in New Orleans than other parts of Louisiana that removed many, many more children from their families. So again, sort of like other parishes in Louisiana do it differently. They do it the traditional, normal way. We remove a lot of kids, and a lot of kids getting hurt and killed. In New Orleans, we're not doing it, and we're not seeing as many child deaths or near deaths. That was what she was using as proof. It was a big deal. It essentially suggested, hey, maybe we don't need to be taking as many kids into foster care as we are nationally. It was essentially like a test case for that. I will say that her methods were controversial. I think she's a badass, but you know, she retired during COVID, during the pandemic, and since she left the bench, you know, she did what she did for many decades. I mean, she was doing this a long time, and yeah, the numbers have got in foster care have gone back up. She was gone. So
yeah, interesting lady.
Interesting, like really gutsy. This is a woman who does love children, who does care about children, who would keep track. I mean, the few kids that she did say, okay, you're staying in foster care, very few, like just a few. She kept track of kids, and a lot of judges won't. You know, they don't. The family court or juvenile court thing is sort of an assembly line. Kids come in front of the judge. The judge's like, okay, stamp, on to the next thing. They're not getting that deep into every case. She would get deep into every case.
Yeah. Sorely missed. I based on what I was just telling you about my two brothers and sisters, you can understand why I loved your chapter, Invisible Science. And it really hit me because of my experiences as a young guy with the foster care system. But you spoke again on a positive note. You spoke a lot about attorney Jennifer Rodriguez, who had been in foster care herself, and she's an attorney, but she had wound up selling drugs and selling herself to some guy. But now she's a lawyer, and she had some very interesting perspectives, including with her boss at she was at a youth camp center
Youth Legal
with
Center
somebody.
in San Francisco.
Right, Carol Schaffer, and she said, and foster care. I didn't know it's a $30 billion operation, and Schaffer said, and I quote, "The practice is rotten. Foster parents were not treated as important players in a child's development. They were never to get too close, as I said earlier. They were never to get too close to their wards because of the kids. If they weren't adopted, they would eventually move on. And once gone, foster parents were barred from having any further contact," close quote. And I know that well. And it just reading that reminded me, because I never really thought about it. So there were parts of your books that brought me back to my lived experience. But all those years that the kids were with us, and we also had a young girl. She didn't stay long. I don't know if she was 17, but she only stayed like months. Everything went well. She was in school and everything went well. She might have aged out, and my parents just didn't tell me. But your book made me realize, as many years as the foster kids were with us, nobody ever came to the house one time. Not one time. I talked to one of my older female cousins who was very close to my mother, came to the house a lot, and she said, no, they didn't. I know that they were taught.
Social worker? You mean like a
Yeah. Never once. Now, I know that they would talk to my mother over the phone occasionally. I would hear my mother talking to them. But as I, became an adult and, I'm a cop and seeing these situations and reading your book, it just brought it back. I'm like, man, in decades, nobody ever showed up one time.
So are you talking about when is this? Is this like the 1980s, 70s?
Yes, 80s, yeah.
80s, okay.
Early 80s, late 70s, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's concerning. I would imagine that now at least a caseworker would make a in-person physical visit. They're supposed to. They're supposed to visit every month.
I think that they felt my father was a carpenter. Him and his twin brother, they built houses. And we had moved out of Bridgeport, so we had a stable home. And my mother was working, so it was a real stable. I think they just figured, well, we can write this off. It's a great family. And they just never, I don't care how great a situation looks. I just know as a cop, you still got to show up once in a while. You just should. And I'm not knocking my parents because they were great, but you got to show up once in a while. But back to attorney Jennifer Rodriguez, once again, foster care system. Man, it was really great to read her story. But she said when she was doing interviews with people who were running departments, and I quote, she said their main thing was to avoid children dying, avoid liability. It was not about healing kids. Foster care was seen as a stopover, not a therapeutic intervention, even though thousands of children's languish in it for years, close quote. It wasn't about, like you were saying earlier, making their situation better, healing them. Nope, it was about, I know that is the cop world, it was about liability. We don't want the kids to die. We don't want them to be held accountable. and we just move them across the assembly line.
So Jennifer Rodriguez is awesome. And with her boss, Carol Schofer, they conceived this other thing, which is another kind of road to something better. Again, just like kinship care, it is building on this essential core importance of connection. Foster kids have very frayed or severed connections to everyone, to anyone. Jennifer Rodriguez's innovation is called Quality Parenting Initiative, QPI. And I think it's in 10 states. It doesn't mean it's happening across all of those 10 states. Jurisdictions in like roughly 10 states have adopted it. And essentially what it is two things. It is an effort to better recruit, train, and match foster parents to kids so that the foster home is not necessarily seen just as like a way station, just like plunk any old kid in there and move them on. No, it's now like, hey, let's have this foster parent who seems well-trained and well-matched to the needs of this particular foster kid. And we need to have a connection between that foster parent and the biological family. Because if that kid is going back home someday, we want to like create a network of connections around the kid so that the kid knows there are all these people who are involved with their well-being, who are connected to them. They are not some isolated child floating randomly through a system. No, there are specific people who see them, who know them, who are keeping track of them. That is essentially what QPI does. But like Florida, I think passed a law that said there has to be a phone call between the foster parent and the biological parent, like ideally the first night, certainly the first week, first couple of nights, so that like the kid is landing in some stranger's home. If that person, that foster parent, talks to the biological family, they might, I mean, it's risky. It doesn't always work, right? But they might be able to find out, oh, you know, Danny likes this kind of food, or Johnny likes, this is his favorite show. Just something to soften the landing in the stranger's house, and more important even, to forge this connection with the family so that the foster parent like can know the kid into the future, even if the kid is no longer in their home. Because traditionally, like the normal, usual way is that a foster parent is not allowed to keep track of a child when they leave. You can't be calling them up saying, how are you doing in school? Do you like your new placement? How's it going? No, you're not allowed to do that, which is, again, crazy. I don't know why the system does it. I'm sure it's for legal litigation type of reasons, but it's not good for kids.
Yeah, I would agree with you that there should be some kind of communication. I think it's real important. As a sidebar, I was a head SWAT negotiator, and now that was a different world. You know, like when somebody's in that situation, the cat is barred in the house or wherever, and he's got a gun, and he's talking about, you know, he wants suicide by a cop, or he's going to blow his head off and all that. And people didn't understand it when I told them about it. You never give them a phone to talk to a family member, whether it's the wife, the mother, whether it's the priest. You never give them the phone, because if they're in that state, that may get, okay, they just want to say their goodbyes and now they're going to blow their head off. So I understand that in that world. But in this world with foster care, I think it's real important. I agree with you. I think it's real important that there has to be some kind of rope going back to the kin, because it's just a tough situation. But, you know, about a year ago, too, I was watching another documentary, and, you know, this country has a long negative history concerning dealing with the youth. And this documentary was talking about, so once again, it was my church. It was a Catholic church, and taking Mexican children and indigenous children from their families and trying to wipe out their culture and Americanize them. Strictly Americanize them. No more going back. No wearing clothes a certain way. No talking in your native language. And I just watched that, and then I combined that with what I told you I saw last week, and combining with your great book, it's just on my mind all the time now. But page 94 to 109, man, we've been talking about some positive people who've gone through foster, because like you said, your book is about 6 people, starting with Marianne. But one of the people also is from Bridgeport like me. Please speak about Sixto Cancel. Please talk about that. I met him years ago. He was speaking somewhere, and I just went up and we were talking, and then somebody had a situation somewhere where I had to go be a cop, and I wasn't working. It wasn't even my city. But anyway, so I only talked to him for like 2 minutes. He had a personality for days. I read that. That kid had a personality for days. He was just me. I'm real good at reading people. Man, he was confident in what he was saying. He knew what he was saying because he lived it, but he had no shaky to him at all. He was just an impressive young man. Please talk about Sixto Cancel.
Okay, so Sixto grew up in Bridgeport in the 1990s, was taken into foster care very young, little, mom with a drug problem. And he was passed through a bunch of different foster homes, and he was eventually adopted. The adoption was really bad. And he felt that his adoptive mom, who had adopted several other kids from foster care as well, was just all about the check. The government gives you government support for adoption. It's like adoption support, similar to foster care. He felt like it was just all about the check. All kids in the system, whether they're foster kids or adopted from foster care, they know that they are a paycheck. It is part of the psychology. It is not good. I mean, they should know because it's the truth, but it is not good inside. This makes a very sort of transactional psychology, right? They think everything is.
It was a business arrangement,
right?
For a lot of people. Yeah.
Sixto is at this adoptive home where he feels he's the only one who's Black in the home, and he feels that he's being treated differently than the other kids. And he feels that his adoptive mom is racially biased. All this stuff, really bad. And he's begging his social worker to remove him and put him back into foster care. But as you're saying, there are financial incentives. Not only does the state give the adoptive parent some adoption support, the state gets money there's an incentive for the state to get kids adopted, because then the state gets more federal dollars. The feds want, right, like permanence. The stated goal of foster care is permanence, and permanence means adoption or reunite. Those are the options. Reunite with your biological family or adopt. That's what the state wants. And so the feds give states money if they get more kids adopted. So a state is going to be very reluctant to reverse an adoption, right? So Sixto's begging, get me out of here. This is disaster. It's bad, bad, bad. His social worker doesn't want to do it. So Sixto is kind of couch surfing. He takes off a lot. He's not literally like a runaway, because now he's been adopted and he's sort of staying at the homes of friends, but he's not really anywhere stable. And he gets this idea about how he's going to prove. I don't want to tell too much of the book. He gets this idea how he's going to prove to his social worker that it's a disaster and he needs to be removed. It doesn't go the way he
thought it would, right?
planned. It doesn't go how he wants to at all. However, he does end up very unusually. I mean, Sixto understood that his situation was bad. Bridgeport's a tough town. He has a lot of brothers and sisters who did not do great. One of them's in a group home, heavily medicated. He sees all these sort of like nightmarish options, like what's going to happen to you. He knows that college is really his only shot to get out of this. He's very young and this is one of the unusual things about Sixto. He has this idea very young. The only way out is college. So he does manage to get himself removed from the adoptive home. I don't want to say why, but he does.
Read the book. Read the book.
Read the book. And he does get himself to college. But what's really incredible is he creates a nonprofit for kids on the cusp of aging out, older youth in foster care. And he's 20 years old, 20. Right. And he founds this nonprofit. And he's sort of getting out there. He's talking about his experience. He's making connections. And because of his incredible personality, which you saw too, and his incredible energy, like Sixto now, today, is in his mid-30s. I don't even know if he's 35 yet. He's like might be 35 at the oldest. He is in his mid-30s. This nonprofit that he created when he was 20, went all over the place, and Sixto ended up becoming working with 3 different presidential administrations, Obama, Trump, first time, and Biden, to sort of elevate the issues of foster care up to the federal level and in Congress. And the whole thing that we were talking about with kinship care and relatives now being able to get some government support if they take in their kin, Sixto has a lot to do with that. He is a driver of that change on the federal level. He also was early to kind of conceive the idea of finding a way to collect the experiences of kids in foster care, exactly what I wanted my book to be, like through their eyes. For him, it wasn't so much through their eyes, but could you quantify? Could you turn their experiences into data, into numbers, and use that data to change laws? That is essentially what Sixto is doing. And he's since, I contacted him when I was working on the book in like 2020 or 21, maybe, pretty recently. He was not like widely known at that point, but now he's a national celebrity in some circles. He is well known. His ascent has been very rapid and sharp. He is a massive organizer and driver of reforms and improvements to a really damaging system. He is an electrifying personality, I would say.
He really is. Yeah, it's a great story. It's a perfect tie-in because you talk, and I know that you're not choosing sides, as you said, but I can also. That's what I get ready to say, Claudia. There's times I see you, and you that kinship care is, and you hammer that, and that's a real important point, and you cemented that in my head big time. That is so necessary, and I'm glad things are starting to change a little bit. I want to congratulate you on writing such a great book that is so needed and so important. You did a fantastic job, and I want to thank you for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation half as much as I did. You did great.
Thank you. I loved this conversation. And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, right. I have my beliefs about foster care, and anyone who reads the book, you're going to come away with a pretty strong impression. But what I will say is, there's a couple things I want to say. If I have a lot of people have said, do you see yourself as an activist? Or no, I don't. I see myself as a journalist, a chronicler, an observer, maybe a mirror. But if there is one thing that I want to be an activist about, it is see these kids, see them. I understand that kids who are violent, commit crimes, or just have behavior problems are difficult to reach. I get it. A lot of these are older youth. They have been hardened a lot of times. A lot of people will point at them and be like, oh yeah, and in the book too, they're broken, it's over, they've been so traumatized or so screwed over, it's over, they have no empathy, budding sociopath, all the labels, right? No, if I have one thing one side, it is no, see these kids. It is hard to see them, I get it, but that is not true. Redemption is real and it is possible. And there are stories in this book of kids who changed. Like they changed. And
we talked about some of them at the end. I purposely saved them for the end, some of these more positive ones. Yeah. And
there were some important changes. And in all of them, it's about stability and connection. Those are the things that have made kids change. Stability and connection. It's real.
And for the folks who just want to see them as problems and bad kids and bad people and this and that, I just got to tell you, for everything that they've gone through and continue to go through, they are a lot tougher than the people who criticize them and think that they're not worth it and all of that kind of stuff. They have something with them. They've made mistakes like everybody else, but they are a tough group mentally to get wherever their lot in life is right now. The fact that they're still living and breathing with their trauma is a testimony to their toughness. To me, that's just what it is. Family, you want to get this one-of-a-kind book, Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care. It's a fantastic, listen, it doesn't matter if you've been through foster care, you know somebody, this is a story that you all need to read. Family, as always, I want to thank you very much for your support, and as you know, I don't do interviews, I do conversations. Thank you for your time, this time. Until next time. Claudia, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
You did it again, my son, little Bobby. We did it again. I love you, son.